Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Firewalls Don't Stop Dragons. I'm your host, Kerry Parker. Today we have episode 415 for February 10th, 2025. And we've got a new show for you today. Lots of interesting topics to cover. Before I get into that, though, a quick PSA. It is tax time again here in the United States, so beware of tax scams. They are coming out of the woodwork as usual. I will also recommend, as I always do around this time of year, that you go and plant your flag with your IRS account. If you have not already created an online IRS account, you should do so before the bad guys do it in your name. Now, the sad fact is, unlike the rest of the government, the IRS, for some inexplicable reason, is not using the government's login.gov authentication site. I used to have a username and password login for the IRS, which is what I've been using for years. And now, instead of using login.gov, this one agency, for some reason, is requiring you to use a third-party authentication service called ID.me. I have been resisting using ID.me because they want you to upload copies of like your driver's license or a passport or something. Supposedly, I think they delete that information once you've confirmed who you are. But I don't want to trust that. And I've already got my government authentication service set up, login.gov. I mean, why can't I just use that? I don't get it. Anyway, I looked real hard to try to find a way to set up an ID.me account without having to upload a picture of my driver's license or government ID, and I cannot find one. I also sent a message to their support staff asking if there was a way to do this, and they pretty much told me no. I say pretty much because they were kind of vague on the whole thing. They said that you might be able to do a video chat with somebody. I think in the video chat you might be able to hold up your ID, but I don't know that they're not taking a picture of that. And when I tried to select the video chat option on the website for setting up my ID.me account, before I could even get that far, it asked me to upload a copy of my ID. So I don't think there's any way around that, sadly. So you'll probably just have to do that if you haven't already. But even if you already have that account set up, you're still going to want to go and get your identity protection PIN, your IP PIN, which is reset annually. So you're still going to want to log in for that and make sure you get your PIN for this year. And you'll need to use that PIN to file your taxes or give it to your accountant so they can file on your behalf. All right, so I said we have a new show. We do. We have a lot of stuff to cover today. First off, Netgear is warning that there's a critical vulnerability in some of its Wi-Fi routers that you need to get fixed. We're going to talk about DeepSeek AI because we can't not talk about it. It's been all over the news. I have several things that I want to draw your attention to with regard to this China-based revolutionary new large language model or AI app. AngelSense has exposed location data and personal information on a lot of their tracked users. A Russian cybercrime group is exploiting a 7-zip flaw to bypass the Windows Mark of the Web protections, and I'm going to tell you what all that means. There's an interesting new macOS malware that disguises itself as some fake installers. There are some other infected apps going around the Apple Store that have been removed, but there's a lot of them, so it's possible they could have missed some or there will be new ones that actually use OCR or optical character recognition to try to pull, Bitcoin wallet IDs and passwords and things from your apps. Android has a new identity check feature, which is pretty cool. It's an anti-theft thing, similar to some things that Apple has done. And then we'll talk about probably the biggest story of the week as far as I'm concerned. And that is that the UK is trying to order Apple to open all of its encrypted user accounts globally. And there's a lot of implications to that we're going to get into. And then finally, my tip of the week, which is sort of an introductory thing. I'm going to be doing a series of articles on this. There's a lot of really interesting privacy-enhancing technologies out there that are promising, and they're not all implemented yet. There's some are still on the horizon, but I wanted to kind of talk about some of those things in a series of articles that I'm going to be writing on my blog, and those are also usually corresponding to my tips of the week as well. So I'll give you a little preview of that, and that'll wrap up the show for the day. So lots to talk about. Let's get to it. Okay, first up, this is a quickie from Bleeping Computer. Basically, if you've got a Netgear router, you should make sure it's updated. This is about some specific models, though, so let me just read this real quick. Netgear has fixed 2 critical vulnerabilities affecting multiple Wi-Fi router models and urged consumers to update their devices to the latest firmware as soon as possible. The security flaws impact multiple Wi-Fi 6 access points, WAX206, WAX214 version 2, and WAX220, and Nighthawk Pro gaming router models XR1000, XR1000 version 2, and XR500. Although the American Computer Networking Company did not disclose more details about the 2 bugs, it did reveal that unauthenticated threat actors can exploit them for remote code execution and authentication bypass in low-complexity attacks that don't require user interaction. So that's bad. Just let me stop for a second. Low complexity means they're easy to do, and it also doesn't require you, the user, to do anything. So that's about as bad as it gets. And wrapping up, here's a quote from Netgear. Netgear strongly recommends that you download the latest firmware as soon as possible. The unauthenticated RCE, which is remote code execution, vulnerability remains if you do not complete all recommended steps. And this last one was odd. They say, Netgear is not responsible for any consequences that could have been avoided by following the recommendations in this notification. So whether you have a Netgear router or not, here's some takeaways. First of all, obviously, if you have one of these particular routers, check out this article. It tells you how to update it and where to go find the new software. But note also that when there's kind of urgent stuff like this, obviously my news show that comes out every 2 weeks is not a great venue for urgent stuff. And so for articles like this, for notifications like this, when it's something you should be working on right away, this is where I post to my social media accounts. So that's really where you want to be following me if you want to get this sort of thing in a timely manner. Now, don't rely on just me, but when I run across stories like this, I do post them right away on my social media for those that follow me, so you could jump right on this stuff when it happens. Now, regardless of what router you have currently, if you've never updated the software on your router, please take this opportunity, regardless of what router you have. Doesn't matter that you have a Netgear, though obviously if you do, this is really important. But take this opportunity to go and learn how to update your router's software or firmware. I do have an article on this on my website that you can check out. I put a link in the show notes. But you basically use a web browser while on your home network to log into the router itself. And then somewhere in there, they're all different. Somewhere in there, there's a security or a software update panel or a tab. You need to find that. And usually today on a modern one, there's a button. You just click the button that says check for updates. And if there is one, hopefully there's also a button that says install. And if you're really lucky, there'll be a button or a checkbox next to that saying, do this automatically from now on. And if that's the case, I would certainly recommend you do that. If you don't want to do that, or if your router does not have that capability, then I would set maybe a monthly reminder to go and check and see if there's updates and apply them if there are. All right, next up, this is from Krebs on security. And unless you've been hiding under a rock for the last week or two, you've heard about this new Chinese artificial intelligence company called DeepSeek, whose app basically went viral. And they've got this new, pretty amazing, actually, large language model called R1 that for supposedly a lot less money to develop and a lot cheaper and lower hardware requirements have come up with the latest and greatest AI app that is competing head to head with the big ones out there, like OpenAI's ChatGPT. So let me read this article and then we'll talk about it. There's definitely some pros and cons to all of this. So first, new mobile apps from the Chinese artificial intelligence company DeepSeek have remained among the top 3 free downloads for Apple and Google devices since their debut on January 25th, 2025. But experts caution that many of DeepSeek's design choices, such as using hard-coded encryption keys and sending unencrypted user and device data to Chinese companies, introduce a number of glaring security and privacy risks, to say the least. Public interest in the DeepSeek AI chat app swelled following widespread media reports that the upstart Chinese AI firm had managed to match the abilities of cutting-edge chatbots while using a fraction of the specialized computer chips that leading AI companies rely on. As of this writing, DeepSeek is the 3rd most downloaded free app on the Apple Store and number 1 on Google Play. DeepSeek's rapid rise caught the attention of the mobile security firm Now Secure, a Chicago-based company that helps clients screen mobile apps for security and privacy threats. In a teardown of the DeepSeek app published today, NowSecure urged organizations to remove the DeepSeek iOS app from their environments, citing security concerns. NowSecure founder Andrew Hoog say they haven't yet concluded an in-depth analysis of the DeepSeek app for the Android devices, but that there is little reason to believe its basic design would be functionally much different. Hoog told Krebs on Security there were a number of qualities about the DeepSeek iOS app that suggest the presence of deep-seated security and privacy risks. For starters, he said, the app collects an awful lot of data about the user's device. The device information shared, combined with the user's internet address and data gathered from mobile advertising companies, could be used to de-anonymize users of the DeepSeek iOS app, NowSecure warned. The report notes that DeepSeek communicates with Voice Engine, a cloud platform developed by ByteDance, the makers of TikTok, although NowSecure said it wasn't clear if the data is just leveraging ByteDance's digital transformation iCloud service, or if the declared information share extends further between the two companies. Perhaps more concerning, NowSecure said that the iOS app transmits device information, quote-unquote, in the clear, without any encryption to encapsulate the data. This means the data being handled by the app could be intercepted, read, and even modified by anyone who has access to any of the networks that carry the app's traffic. And this is a quote from that report. It says, quote, "The DeepSeek iOS app globally disables app transport security, which is an iOS platform-level protection that prevents sensitive data from being sent over unencrypted channels. Since this protection is disabled, the app can and does send unencrypted data over the internet," unquote. Hoog said the app does selectively encrypt portions of the responses coming from the DeepSeek servers. But they also found that it uses an insecure and now deprecated encryption algorithm called 3DES, aka triple DES, and that the developers had hard-coded the encryption key. That means that the cryptographic key needed to decipher those data fields can be extracted from the app itself. There were other less alarming security and privacy issues highlighted in the report, but Hoog says he's confident there are additional unseen security concerns lurking within the app's code. Axios reported on January 30th that U.S. congressional offices are being warned not to use the app. And this is a quote from that notice that says, "Threat actors are already exploiting DeepSeek to deliver malicious software and infect devices. To mitigate these risks, the House of Representatives, has taken security measures to restrict DeepSeek's functionality on all House-issued devices," unquote. TechCrunch reports that Italy and Taiwan have already moved to ban DeepSeek over security concerns. Bloomberg writes that the Pentagon has blocked access to DeepSeek, and CNBC says NASA also banned employees from using the service, as did the U.S. Navy. Beyond security concerns tied to the DeepSeek iOS app, there are indications that the Chinese AI company may be playing fast and loose with the data that it collects from and about users. On January 29th, researchers at Wiz said they discovered a publicly accessible database linked to DeepSeek that exposed, quote, "a significant volume of chat history, back-end data, and sensitive information, including log streams, API secrets, and operational details. More critically, the exposure allowed for full database control and potential privilege escalation within the DeepSeek environment without any authentication or defense mechanism to the outside world," unquote. Okay, so two big takeaways. First of all, don't use this app. These guys do not know what the heck they're doing with respect to privacy and security. So until and if they fix that, do not install this app. Second, generally speaking, be really wary of any of these kind of viral apps, these apps that all of a sudden pop to the top of the top most installed apps list, the ones that are all over the news, the one that everyone's saying, "Oh, you got to try this, you got to try this." First of all, for a couple things. First of all, a lot of these new apps done by new developers have horrible security because they didn't focus on that at all and may not know what the heck they're doing in regard to that anyway, which sounds like what's going on here. Second, because they're so hugely popular, they are prime targets for hackers and phishers and other bad guys to try to glom onto the popularity of something. Everyone is downloading this new app that everyone's talking about and installing it right away. And so they have lookalike apps, or they find some way to compromise the app and you install it from some place that's not the regular place. And so not only are you installing the app, you're installing their malware too. Or in cases like this where the app has got horrible security, they they use those insecurities to attack the people who have installed the app. So be extremely careful about these latest and greatest viral apps that everybody is talking about. They are prime targets for the bad guys. Okay, now here's the good side of all this. First of all, let me just say again that artificial intelligence, and that's a really loaded term. It has lots of meanings, but the way it's been talked about in the press lately, we talk about AI, in particular these large language models, these LLMs, like ChatGPT and Claude and Gemini. This is seriously disruptive technology. This is really going to be a big deal. It is not a flash in the pan, and we still don't really understand it or understand what it's going to change yet. But this is going to change a lot of things, for the better and for the worse. Now, in the US, the stock market tanked when this technology came out because, at least if you believe the researchers, this was done by a much smaller team, I think 200 people, whereas like Meta and Microsoft and Google have probably got thousands of engineers working on stuff like this. And supposedly they did it for 1 to 2 orders of magnitude less money than all these other companies took to do their thing. Not just because of labor costs, but because of hardware costs and compute time costs. Because the hardware that that these Chinese researchers were able to use, because of all the export restrictions on the best hardware that we have, basically because they were forced to innovate, they found a way, a smarter, better, cheaper, faster, easier way to put together a powerful AI model with a lot less people, a lot less money, and a lot less hardware. Which is why the market tanked, particularly the tech stocks, because companies like NVIDIA were making money hand over fist, selling these crazy powerful and extremely expensive and high profit margin GPUs, graphical processing units, to these other companies, because until this company came along, DeepSeek, everyone thought, well, that's the only way to do it. You got to throw money at this stuff. And if you could do it without throwing money at it, then all of a sudden, companies like NVIDIA don't look to be nearly as valuable. So 2 other points I want to make about this. One of the other really kind of amazing things about this project is that it is truly open source. Like, you can go download the code right now and modify it if you wish. You can run it locally, and you can see exactly what this code is doing. OpenAI, which has open right there in the name, and it was meant to be this. It was meant to be an open model, a democratizing thing to make sure that this technology was available to everybody. And they have since closed all that down. Should be called closed AI, not open AI. But these guys, at least so far, in this current model, is open. The source is there for anybody to use and modify and extend. So this should lead to a whole bunch of other competitors, which is fantastic. But here's the thing that I think I'm most excited about. Because this model, the way they did it, required much less heavy-duty hardware. Theoretically, what this means is that we could have very powerful AI chatbots and language models and so on that can run completely locally on our computers and smartphones. In other words, not requiring that all of our queries and interactions be sent to some cloud server somewhere that we have to trust. So I'm really, really hoping that what this means is that we will now be able to do powerful AI stuff completely on our devices locally and get a lot more privacy and security. So bottom line, AI is still an exploding technology. It is a force of nature. It is extremely disruptive. We don't know where this is going to go yet. It's going to have pros. It's going to have cons. But I honestly am pretty excited about it. And I really like this particular project, not the app. Don't install the app. But from a technology standpoint, I really dig the fact that it's open source and it can be done with much cheaper hardware. I think this is going to open the doors to a lot of really cool tech that hopefully is more private and secure. All right, this next one is from TechCrunch, and it's about a company called AngelSense, which I'd never heard about. But there is a breach, and it's just, well, it's just nasty. So AngelSense, an assistive technology company that provides location monitoring devices for people with disabilities, was spilling the personally identifiable information and precise location data of its users to the open internet, TechCrunch has learned. The company secured the exposed server on Monday, more than a week after it was alerted to the data leak by researchers at security firm UpGuard. The New Jersey-based AngelSense provides GPS trackers and location monitoring to thousands of customers, according to its mobile app listing, and is touted by law enforcement and police departments across the United States. According to UpGuard's researchers, AngelSense left an internal database exposed to the internet without a password, allowing anyone to access the data inside using only a web browser and knowledge of the database's public IP address. The database was storing real-time updating logs from an AngelSense system that included the personal information of AngelSense customers as well as technical logs about the company's systems. UpGuard said it found customers' personal data, like names, postal addresses, and phone numbers, in the exposed database. The researchers said they also found GPS coordinates of individuals being monitored, including associated health information about the tracked person, which includes conditions like autism and dementia. The researchers also found email addresses, passwords, and authentication tokens for accessing customer accounts, as well as partial credit card information, all of which was visible in plain text, UpGuard said. In other words, it was not encrypted. It's not known exactly how long the database was exposed, nor how many customers were affected. According to the database's listing on Shodan, a search engine of internet-facing devices and systems, and I'll come back to that here in a minute, AngelSense's exposed logging database was first spotted online on January 14th, though it may have been exposed sometime earlier. AngelSense chief executive Doran Sommer confirmed to TechCrunch that the company took the exposed server offline after initially identifying UpGuard's first email as spam. Database exposures are often the result of misconfigurations caused by human error rather than malicious intent, and have become an increasingly common occurrence in recent years. Similar security lapses of exposed databases have resulted in the spill of sensitive U.S. military emails, the real-time leak of text messages containing two-factor codes, and chat histories from AI chatbots. Okay, so real quick, this Shodan thing. I've talked about this before. Shodan is a publicly available free online search tool that looks for devices on the internet. And of course, there's billions of devices on the internet, so why is that useful? Well, it looks for devices on the internet that have exposed services that really shouldn't be exposed. In other words, ways to connect or query these devices that probably shouldn't be publicly available. Josh Corman, who I've had on the show before and worked at CISA, had a slide about this that said, get your stuff off search, which, pardon my French, was what he really meant to say was get your shit off Shodan. Shodan is the server, again, available to anybody, good guys and bad guys. It's a research tool. And anybody, by the way, could be doing this. This is just giving you a nice graphical interface on this. If you know the right ways to do this on your computer, you could do these same searches yourself and find the same information. You're just basically probing all the devices you can find on the internet and probing in known ways to look for these open ports, these running services on there that may not be protected by a password or any sort of authentication. For example, if you go poking around on Shodan right now, you can find public webcams, people who have put webcams, security webcams, on the internet without protecting them. And so you could see what those cameras are showing right now, for example. So the takeaway for me here is, if Shodan can find these things, which is an automated free tool, why are companies not doing a scan of their own servers constantly looking for stuff like this? Second, these researchers found a bug and tried to contact this company, but their email was rejected as spam. If you have a security contact email, I realize you want to probably prevent spam from getting in there, but in this case, the spam filter's got to be a little bit different. And honestly, we need to come up with better ways to notify people of security vulnerabilities other than just plain old email, because email has problems. We need to come up with standardized and in many cases automated ways to tell companies that they have a problem. In fact, I would go a step further. These things, in this case, I think this was an SQLite database, which is a very popular free database used by a lot of servers on the internet. Why don't these tools, first of all, they should really complain about ever being set up without some sort of an authentication mechanism and encryption. I mean, like, it shouldn't be possible to do that without going through a lot of hoops. Second, why are there not automated ways for external tools to kind of tickle these services like SQLite, like maybe put in a canary account or a canary database entry that if it ever gets modified or accessed in any way, sets off an alarm bell for the security folks to say, something is wrong, that we got to get this fixed. But just at a more simple level, all of these popular internet tools that everybody is using need to have built-in, well-known ways to both test their security and to report problems with their security, and perhaps even some sort of an automated way to react when, again, like some sort of a honeypot or canary entry gets modified. I don't know. This is the engineer in me looking at this problem and thinking we could come up with way better ways to do this sort of stuff. And I don't know why we haven't done that yet. So I guess the other takeaway here is, again, it's the same takeaway for all these companies collecting this data. Don't collect it if you can't protect it. All these companies collecting this very sensitive data need to do better. And there are really no consequences for them not doing it unless they do it so badly that there's a massive class action lawsuit, and that takes years. We need to do better, and honestly, we need laws that will hold these companies accountable for this sort of horrible security. All right, back to a more straightforward story. This is from the Hacker News, and it's about a new 7-zip flaw that is used to bypass the Windows Mark of the Web protections. And while the specifics of this article are one thing, there's a lot of interesting points I want to make about this in general, so hang with me. A recently patched security vulnerability in the 7-zip archiver tool was exploited in the wild to deliver the smoke loader malware. The flaw, which, and they give a CVE number here, allows remote attackers to circumvent the Mark of the Web, or the MOTW, protections and execute arbitrary code in the context of the current user. In other words, in the context of the user, so if the user was not an administrator, then it would only have non-administrator capabilities. However, most people still run their daily driver accounts on their Windows and Macs as admin users. So if you get hit by this campaign, the malware that you are accidentally installing could basically do anything at once. So this flaw allows remote attackers to circumvent the Mark of the Web and execute arbitrary code. And it was addressed by 7-zip in November of 2024 with version 24.09. It's suspected that this flaw was likely weaponized to target governmental and non-governmental organizations in Ukraine as part of a cyber espionage campaign set against the backdrop of the ongoing Russo-Ukrainian conflict. Mark of the Web is a security feature implemented by Microsoft in Windows to prevent the automatic execution of files downloaded from the internet without performing further checks through Microsoft Defender Smart Screen. It works by making use of the alternate data stream, or ADS feature, of the Windows NTFS file system to place a zone identifier tag with the value zoneid equals 3 to signify that the file has been downloaded from an external, untrusted source and that it needs to be subjected to additional checks. This exploit bypasses Mark of the Web by double archiving contents using 7-zip, i.e. creating an archive and then embedding that archive within another archive to conceal the malicious payloads. And this is a quote from one of the researchers, quote, "The root cause of this bug is that prior to version 24.09, 7-zip did not properly propagate Mark of the Web protections to the content of double encapsulated archives. This allows threat actors to create archives containing malicious scripts or executables that will not receive the Mark of the Web protections, leaving Windows users vulnerable to attacks," unquote. The starting point is a phishing email that contains a specially crafted archive that, in turn, employs a homoglyph attack to pass off the inner zip archive as a Microsoft Word document file, effectively triggering the vulnerability. And homoglyph means using different characters that look the same to the naked eye, but in fact are different. And because the computer can tell the difference, it might discount something named in this way, thinking it's safe or not triggering further inspection, and the user looking at this can't tell the difference and thinks that it's a regular everyday file. back to the article. This approach leads to an execution of an internal shortcut, a .url file, present within the zip archive, which points to an attacker-controlled server hosting another zip file. The newly downloaded zip file contains the smoke loader executable that's disguised as a PDF document. At least 9 Ukrainian government entities and other organizations have been assessed to be impacted by the campaign, including the Ministry of Justice, Kyiv Public Transportation Service, Kyiv Water Supply Company, and City Council. Okay. So, by itself, that is obviously a very focused attack on folks in Ukraine, which is, I don't know how many of you folks are listening. I hope that you are. But obviously, that's a very small portion of the overall global population. However, there's a lot of things we could take away from this, and some things I want you to know about that you might not have known about or thought about. This trick that they're using here bypasses protections in the operating system that would normally flag downloaded files as potentially dangerous and therefore should be treated carefully. You know, in this case, you will see pop-up warnings if you try to open them or run them, for example. The operating system will say, hey, this was downloaded from the internet. Are you sure you want to trust it? I'm sure you've seen this before. This is what triggers that to happen. It's this mark of the web flag. So what is that? So mark of the web, as Windows calls it, is a really cool concept. And it's one you might not have known about, or at least not explicitly. And it's part of the file's metadata. So you can actually see this on Windows. If you right click on a file in Windows, and the easiest way to do this is to go to your downloads folder, because probably everything in there should have this mark. If you right click on that file and look at the properties, under the general tab at the very bottom, if it's got the mark of the web, you'll see this security thing that says, this file came from another computer and might be blocked to help protect this computer. Removing this flag, but basically acknowledging this flag and saying, I trust this file, or I trust the source of this file. Stop warning me. But Windows automatically put this flag on that file in the file's metadata so that whenever you tried to use it, the operating system would warn you and say, hey, be careful what you're doing with this file. Are you sure you want to do this? I think that's a really cool concept. Now, Macintoshes also have this capability. They don't call it mark of the web. It's actually a lot more obscure, and there's no easy way through the regular Macintosh operating system to see this information. Like if you right click and do the get info on a file on Mac, it gives you lots of information about that file. This would be the perfect place for it to have a little thing in there that says this was downloaded from the internet and you may not want to trust it. You know, it should have the same, honestly, it should have the same information right there in the graphical user interface like it does on Windows. I wish it would, but it's an XAttr field, XATTR, on the file. If you really want to check this out, there are ways you can open up the terminal in Mac, and at the command line, you can query a file for this value and see if it's got this mark, which is really kind of a pain. They should honestly expose this in a better way. But here's the other thing that's interesting about this particular attack. It's a zip file of a zip file, right? So a zip is a compression thing. So if I have a whole bunch of folders and files and I want to put them into one bundle, and if possible, compress that and shrink it as much as possible for sending it to somebody, I would quote unquote zip it up or compress it. 7-Zip is a particular application that does this, a very popular one. I think it's open source and free now, that will take a file or a series of files and compress them down into a single zip file for transport. And then when you get at the other end, you double click it, you open it up, and you get all the stuff that was in the contents of that file. Now, what they did here, and the article didn't really make this clear, but I think I read this somewhere else, is the zip file within the zip file appeared to be a Microsoft Office file of some sort. Now, they mentioned a PDF, but I think this was one of the intermediate steps. And the reason I'm bringing this up is what you might not realize is that modern Microsoft Office files have a standard format. The newer ones end in X, so like .docx. Like the old ones used to be .doc, .doc, and the old spreadsheet files were .xls for Excel. The modern ones end in X, so .docx and .xlsx, for example. That X is the modern file format. It's an open format that Microsoft finally came out with, and crucially, it's actually based on the zip file format. So when you're looking at a Microsoft Office file that ends in something X, it's actually a zip file. And with the right zip utility, you can actually take that quote unquote file and open it up and see its contents. It's actually multiple files and folders. And you can actually poke around and look inside there. Some of the things that are in there, by the way, are other metadata things like the author or maybe even like locations or last time it was edited, things like that. You can find that metadata. Now, if you go poking around there and actually remove files or change something, you can actually corrupt the file, so be careful. But you can actually look at the contents of this with the right zip utility and see that these files, what looks to be a single file in the Windows Explorer, whenever you're looking at it and sending it to someone, you might be thinking, oh, that's just a file. Well, it is a file, but it's actually a zip of multiple files and folders. And just for completeness, Mac does this as well, at least with like applications, and they're called bundles. And if you go to your applications folder on a Mac and right click on any of those applications, you'll see an option that says show package contents, because it's not really a file. That application is actually multiple files and folders under the covers. So I thought you'd be interested to know that your operating system kind of lies to you or changes what you see to make it simpler for you, but under the covers is actually more complex. And that is some of what was behind this attack. All right, next up, this is from Apple Insider, and it's about some malware that disguises itself as a Chrome or Zoom installer. Security researchers from Sentinel Labs have identified fresh variants of a North Korean malware family dubbed Flexible Ferret that is actively exploiting macOS users. The malware is part of a broader campaign known as Contagious Interview, where attackers pose as recruiters to trick job seekers into installing malicious software. Apple responded with an XProtect signature update to counter these threats, blocking several variants. XProtect is Apple's built-in malware detection and removal tool for macOS, designed to identify and block known malicious software. It runs silently in the background using regularly updated security signatures to detect threats when files are downloaded or executed. Unlike traditional antivirus software, XProtect operates at the system level with minimal user interaction, automatically protecting Macs without requiring manual scans. The malware campaign has evolved from an earlier DPRK, or that's North Korea, DPRK attributed threats discovered in December and January. Attackers are using deceptive tactics such as fake Chrome updates and disguised Zoom installers to infect macOS systems. The malware's persistence mechanisms and data exfiltration methods indicate a well-funded, state-backed operation. The Flexible Ferret malware primarily spreads through social engineering. Victims are tricked into downloading a seemingly legitimate app such as VCam or camera access after encountering an error message during a fake job interview. In reality, these apps install a malicious persistence agent that runs in the background, stealing sensitive data, what we call a stealer. One identified package, versus.pkg, contains multiple malicious components, including installeralert.app, versus.app, and a rogue binary named Zoom. Once executed, the malware installs a launch agent to maintain persistence and communicates with a command and control server via Dropbox. Apple's latest XProtect update blocks key malware components disguised as macOS system files, including com.apple.secd. However, some Flexible Ferret variants remain undetected, highlighting the evolving nature of these threats. Mac users should be cautious when downloading software from untrusted sources and skeptical of unexpected software installation prompts. Apple's built-in security measures provide a first line of defense, but additional endpoint security solutions can help detect and block emerging threats. So some takeaways from this one. First of all, think of the social engineering that's going into this. They're setting up fake job interviews, and during this job interview for a job that doesn't exist, something pops up during the thing saying, hey, you've got a problem with the software, or you need to update your software, or in order to see the video, you need to install this plugin or whatever. Some pop up that wants you to install something, and you're right in the middle of this interview, and you're thinking, oh, geez, let me quickly do this. Sorry, give me a second, and you do this. All the while, the person at the other end knowing full well what's going on. And this is, how they trick you into doing this. This is social engineering. So the other thing this article brings up is that Macintosh computers have a sort of simplified built-in antivirus protection. It's actually got a few different levels of this. XProtect is one of them. And Apple doesn't talk about them that much, but they're pretty decent. I mean, they're not perfect, but no AV software solution is. But what I like about it is that it's built in. And this is really the best way to go. The operating system itself, and whether it's Mac OS or Windows or Linux or whatever, has all the information and the capabilities required to do antivirus work to protect you. I mean, look at this mark of the web stuff we were talking about, right? That's one of these kind of built-in protections. And to do that right, it really needs to be part of the operating system. It needs to be at that most basic level of the computer. And that's why I really don't like third-party antivirus software. For those software applications to be able to do the kinds of things that your operating system can do means they have to be given a lot of capabilities, a lot of access, a lot of permissions. They have to really sink their tendrils into your operating system to kind of become an adjunct to your operating system. And that opens the doors for all sorts of bad things to happen. So that's why I really think antivirus is the purview of the operating system and the hardware maker in some cases. On Windows, you've got the built-in free Windows Defender. If you want antivirus software, I think you absolutely should do that. But I really don't recommend that people use third-party antivirus software. You're much better off just having really good internet hygiene and leaning on the stuff that's already built into your operating system. And it's not because some of these solutions aren't perhaps better at blocking threats, but they can also get up to a lot of mischief. And I've talked about it on this before. They're really in a privileged position, and a lot of these companies are abusing that position to further monetize your data. And ironically, in the past, we have seen several instances where the security of the antivirus software itself is bad, and bad guys exploit the antivirus software to infect your computer. Look, nothing is perfect, and the operating system protections aren't always perfect, but to me, that is the right solution for most people. One other thing I will call out here is that for this particular one, it talked about installing a persistence agent, something that would survive restarts and keep reinfecting your computer if you try to delete parts of it. If you're on a Mac, go look at Patrick Wardle's Objective-C website. He's got a lot of great free security utilities there. In this case, he's got two that you can look at. One's called Block and one's called Knock. Knock is passive. Knock will just tell you what persistent software you have installed on your Mac. So you might be able to reveal that you've got one of these malicious persistent agents on your machine. And Block actually goes one step further and will get in the way of anything that tries to install something permanent on your computer. The only reason I don't like that is most people will see something come up and they're like, is that good or is that bad? Like, because they usually have weird names, and it's hard to just look at it and say, oh yeah, I trust that. You would have to do a lot more research anyway. But anyway, look at those tools. They're free. They're good. They're Mac only. But if you're looking for something a little extra, you might check that out. All right, one more quick story, and then we'll get to our big story of the week. This is from Mac Rumors, and it's about an iPhone malware campaign that uses a tricky technique. Information on new SparkCat malware infesting a small number of iOS apps was shared yesterday by Kaspersky, and shortly after the report came out, Apple pulled the apps from the App Store. Some of the apps that had hidden malware included CumCum, WeTink, and AnyGPT. I've never heard of those, but then I hardly ever install new apps on my phone. 11 apps were removed in total, but when removing the apps, Apple found another 89 with the same code that had been previously rejected or removed from the App Store for violating Apple's fraud policies. When an app is removed for fraud, Apple terminates the associated developer account. As outlined by Kaspersky, the apps used a malicious framework with OCR capabilities, that's optical character recognition. That's the software that basically lets you scan some text and then convert the image of text to actual text, basically reading the text. So these apps use a malicious framework with OCR capabilities designed to suss out sensitive information in images and screenshots stored on iPhones. Recovery phrases for crypto wallets were a specific target, with attackers aiming to steal Bitcoin and other cryptocurrency. But the malware could target other phrases like passwords. By default, Apple blocks access to the user's photos, so the apps would have needed express user consent to operate. If given a permission to access a photo library, the apps could scan through the images to look for key phrases outlined by the attackers. If an image with a relevant phrase was found, it was uploaded to a remote server. Kaspersky found that the malware was likely targeting iOS users in Europe and Asia. It's worth noting that Apple added granular control over the images that an app is able to access back in iOS 14, and there is an option to provide access to a limited number of images rather than the entire photo library. It's a good idea to avoid apps that seem sketchy and to refrain from giving an app access to all of your images. Apple also provides an app privacy report that outlines all the instances when an app accesses sensitive data like location, images, camera, and microphone. The Apple Private Report can be found in the privacy section of the Settings app. All right, so not a whole lot to add to that. I thought that was interesting. Now, I don't know how often people would take pictures of their wallet phrases, but maybe that's how they remember them. It's written down somewhere or it's on a web page and they don't want to forget it, so they take a picture of it. Maybe credit card numbers, passwords, things like that. If you took pictures of those things and then gave one of these malicious apps access to your entire photo library, basically it was going through the photo library trying to find photos that might have pictures of interesting secrets, uploading them to their server and then using those secrets. So I really like the fact that Apple has given you this new option of when an application says, hey, I want to access all your photos, you could say, not all my photos. You can have access to these photos. And it can be kind of a pain because then when you want to go share a new photo, you've got to go back into the permissions and say, okay, add these 2 more pictures to the list of pictures that this particular app can access. Unfortunately, this is where we are today. This is why we can't have nice things. Okay, I lied. There are 2 more articles left. One more quickie, and then we'll get to the big one. This is from Bleeping Computer. It's about a really cool new feature in Android. Google has announced a new Android identity check security features that locks sensitive settings behind biometric authentication when outside a trusted location. The new feature is part of Android's Theft Protection Suite, which includes features like last year's Theft Detection Lock, which is now rolling out to more Android device models. The new identity check feature is designed to enhance theft protections in Android by requiring biometric authentication to access critical account and device settings when outside trusted locations. Some sensitive actions that fall within Identity Check's protections include performing a factory reset, changing the screen lock, registering a new fingerprint, turning off Find My Device, adding a Google account, accessing developer options, and opening Google Password Manager. The feature also enables enhanced protection for Google accounts and additional security for Samsung accounts on eligible devices. At launch, Identity Check will only be available on Google Pixel running Android 15 and Samsung Galaxy phones running One UI 7. To enable the feature, head to Settings, Google Account, All Services, Theft Protection, and enable the Identity Check toggle switch. Theft Detection Lock is Google's AI-powered theft detection system that identifies phone theft events based on sensor data, Wi-Fi, and Bluetooth and lock the screen. The feature is designed to activate when someone grabs the phone out of the owner's hands and runs away, which could expose personal data if the screen remains unlocked. Previously only available on Google Pixel devices, Google is now rolling out theft detection to all phones running Android 10 and later. To turn on the feature on your device, tap on Settings, Google Account, All Services, Theft Protection, and toggle the Theft Detection Lock so it's enabled. Note that the feature can be introduced by Google Play system updates even on devices no longer supported by security updates. That's great. Finally, Google mentions that it's working closely with the GSMA, which is the GSM Association, which, GSM is the cellular system. They're working with GSMA to develop new systems to tackle mobile device theft, and more information on that will be disclosed at a later date. So, not a lot to say about that. This is all good stuff. Again, this is where we are at today. People running up behind you and snatching your phone away and then trying to get into your phone to get up to mischief is a thing that happens. Again, it's a cat and mouse game. For a while, we all thought we were safe because our phones had locks on them, right? And to get into your phone, you had to use a biometric lock or enter a PIN code. And so the bad guys said, well, okay, that's all well and good, but what if they're at the bar and they're on their phone, I see them already doing something unlocked, and I just reach up and grab it and run. Now the phone is unlocked, and I can do whatever I want. Well, these sort of features, and Apple has these built into iOS now too, are meant to address this situation. And so we go back and forth. If everybody turns this on, then now, the bad guys will have to come up with some other way to get into our phones. All right, now for the story of the week. And this one is from The Verge. This was originally broken by the Washington Post, and I like to give them credit for this because they've been doing some good work. However, the Washington Post version of this is paywalled, so you wouldn't be able to read it unless you had an account, and is a lot longer. So The Verge shortened it up, so I'm going to use their take on this. Apple has reportedly been ordered by the UK government to create a backdoor that would give security officials access to users' encrypted iCloud backups. If implemented, British security services would have access to the backups of any user worldwide, not just Brits, and Apple would not be permitted to alert the users that their encryption was compromised. The Washington Post reports that the secret order, issued last month, is based on rights given under the UK's Investigatory Powers Act of 2016, also known as the Snoopers Charter, which we've talked about multiple times on the podcast. Officials have apparently demanded blanket access to end-to-end encrypted files uploaded by any user worldwide, rather than access to a specific account. Apple's iCloud backups aren't encrypted by default, but the advanced data protection option was added in 2022 and must be enabled manually. I talked about that when it came out, and I highly recommend that every iPhone user turn that on. It uses end-to-end encryption so that not even Apple can access encrypted files. In response to the order, Apple is expected to simply stop offering advanced data protection in the UK. This wouldn't meet the UK's demand for access to files shared by global users, however. Apple has the right to appeal the notice on the basis of the cost of implementing it and whether the demand is proportionate to security requirements, but any appeal cannot delay implementation of the original order. The UK has reportedly served Apple a document called a Technical Capability Notice. It's a criminal offense to even reveal that the government has made a demand. Similarly, if Apple did accede to the UK's demands, then it apparently would not be allowed to warn users that its encrypted service is no longer fully secure. So let me stop for just a second, just to let all of that sink in real quick. So what this basically is saying is that the government can demand that Apple do this. Apple cannot tell anybody that it was demanded of them that they do this, and they must implement it while it's under appeal. They can't use the appeal to delay implementing this requested feature. And furthermore, they cannot tell their users that anything has changed. So 2 years ago, Apple comes out with this advanced data protection thing that they say is end-to-end encrypted, that even they can't get to your stuff. And this UK law allows the government to tell Apple to undermine that end-to-end encryption and not tell anybody about it. All right, let me finish this article and then I'll talk some more. Okay, so this actually kind of all went down last year. And so this is a quote from Apple from last year. It says, quote, "There is no reason why the UK government should have the authority to decide for citizens of the world whether they can avail themselves of the proven security benefits that flow from end-to-end encryption," unquote. And that was a quote from Apple that they told to the British Parliament in March of 2024 amidst a discussion of an amendment to the Investigatory Powers Act, which we talked about last year when this happened. It had previously pushed back against other UK attempts to legislate backdoors in encrypted communications. Security services and lawmakers in the UK have consistently pushed back against end-to-end encryption services, arguing that the technology makes it easier for terrorists and child abusers to hide from law enforcement. Quote, "End-to-end encryption cannot be allowed to hamper efforts to catch perpetrators of the most serious crimes," unquote, a UK government spokesperson told The Guardian in 2022 after Apple first introduced end-to-end encryption. U.S. agencies, including the FBI, have expressed similar fears in the past, but have more recently begun recommending encryption as a way to counter hackers linked to China. In December of 2024, the NSA and the FBI joined Canada, Australia, and New Zealand's cybersecurity centers in recommending web traffic be, quote, "end-to-end encrypted to the maximum extent possible," unquote, in new security best practices. Notably, UK security services didn't join them. If Apple grants the UK government access to encrypted data, it's likely that other countries, including the US and China, will see the opportunity to demand the same right. Apple will have to decide whether to comply or remove its encryption service entirely. Other tech companies would almost certainly face similar requests next. Google has offered encrypted Android backups by default since 2018, and Meta also offers encrypted backups for WhatsApp users. Spokespeople for both declined to comment to the Washington Post on whether they had received governmental requests for backdoors. Google's Ed Fernandez reiterated that the company, quote, can't access Android end-to-end encrypted backup data even with a legal order, unquote, while Meta pointed to a previous statement that no backdoors would be implemented. Okay. I have a lot to say about this. First of all, we fought what we called the crypto wars back in the 90s. This is back when Phil Zimmerman came out with PGP, Pretty Good Privacy, and exporting high-quality encryption was treated as a munition as far as export controls go by the U.S. government. We kind of thought we had won those crypto wars back in the day. We'd finally convinced everybody that strong encryption was good for everybody. You know, it protects our communications, including things like talking to our healthcare providers, talking to banks for financial transactions. It also protects politicians and people working in the military, right? Encryption is a good thing. But the crypto wars are back, and some have called this the crypto wars 2.0. After 9/11 here in the U.S., that's when a lot of pressure came back for this stuff. We saw that they were kind of doing this behind the scenes without telling us when Edward Snowden revealed what he revealed in 2013. And so the debate has been honestly raging ever since. But it has really, really heated up in the last, 1 to 2 years. It has come back with a vengeance. So this Snoopers Charter, with its controversial amendment, which was passed, it was either late 2023 or early 2024. This article seems to say March 2024. Had a clause in it that a lot of companies objected to, that basically would say that you've got to do this technical stuff if we say it. But at the time, and I don't think this was actually in the law, but somebody from Parliament who basically was helping or trying to say how they would interpret this law said, and this is a quote from something I dug up, it says, if the appropriate technology does not exist that meets these requirements, then Ofcom, which is the Office of Communications in the UK, will not be able to use Clause 122 to require its use, unquote. So this was some weird sort of compromise that allowed the lawmakers to look like they were doing something when in reality nothing would change. Until it did, because apparently this is what they're using, this is what they're invoking, saying that they weren't going to do. They are saying that we want you to let us in. Now, I guess maybe they're not requiring them to backdoor the technology. Maybe they're just requiring them to not use it at all. Or, I mean, it's not clear. And that honestly is part of the game, right? It's a vague but powerful request saying you must give us access to this. It doesn't say how. So they can say, well, it must be possible. So therefore, this exception that we carved out is not in play. You can do this. It's technically feasible. So this was basically the other shoe waiting to drop. When this happened last year, and we were all debating this last year, I'm sure I said at the time, at least I hope I did, that I wasn't buying this for a second. Like this was going to come back to bite us somehow. This law was bad. So this has massive implications if this is true. And who knows how this came to light, because supposedly, when this power is invoked by the government, by the UK government, the company being asked to do this is not supposed to talk about it. So, I mean, just think about that. If Apple complies and we hadn't known about this, all of a sudden, somehow, all of these claims about our stuff being protected in the way that even Apple can't get to would be lies. And Apple probably would be legally required not to change its verbiage around that. They would be basically forced to lie. And I don't know how that stands up to any legal argument. But as soon as you start talking about national security, everything goes out the window. Everything is possible when, quote unquote, national security is on the line. That excuse, that reasoning is being used to basically allow the governments to see all of our stuff. And so I've got lots of problems with this. We've talked about it before, but since this has come up and it's now brought to a head yet again, let's talk about these things. So encryption and privacy in general are once again under attack. This is Crypto Wars 2.0. And unfortunately for us, the regular citizens, the stars politically are really aligned right now for these sorts of things to happen, and not in a good way. I mean, I try really hard on this show not to be alarmist because so much of security and privacy news can be hyperbolic and over the top and focus on the wrong things. But this is a big deal. You need to understand that this is really important and we have got to keep an eye on this. I hope this doesn't happen. I hope Apple stands up somehow and fights against this. What I'm kind of hoping is that what we'll see is that Apple will just pull out of the UK or turn these features off for UK residents. I don't see how the UK can force Apple to do anything for people outside the UK. But I mean, international law is weird. But somebody leaked this. We were not supposed to know that this was happening. We were just going to lose our privacy, lose our security, and Apple would not be able to tell us that had happened. But somebody leaked this to the press, and thank goodness they did. But it begs the question, has this already happened somewhere else and we didn't find out about it? As much as we want to trust these companies, they're proprietary. We can't look at the software that we're running. And because a lot of the software is actually in the cloud anyway, it's not even just on our devices. We don't have access to the software. So what do we do about this? I, for one, am just sick and tired of my government telling me that I can't have privacy, that I can't have communications with people without them being able to monitor everything I do and say. I understand that we need to catch the bad guys, but there are ways to do that. We've done it for years without having to spy on everybody all the time. That is not a world that we want to live in. So one of the things we need to do, and I encourage you to do, and I have in the past, but this brings it into fine focus, we need to normalize the use of things like end-to-end encryption and privacy in general. We need to normalize it. Privacy is a human right. It's not something you have to defend or justify. You just have it. And therefore, we need to exercise that right explicitly, loudly, proudly. So in the near term, we all need to use Signal. Maybe not all the time, maybe not with everybody, but install it, get it up and running, get a few friends on it, get your family on it. Use it some of the time anyway. We should be using services like Proton Mail. If you don't like Proton, fine. Go to Tuta and find some of these other email services that are truly end-to-end encrypted and private. We should be using technologies like VPNs where appropriate. They're not the silver bullet they say they are, but there are times when using VPNs makes sense, and there are good VPNs out there. I use Proton VPN, but you could use Mullvad or iVPN. There are some other good ones as well. However, there is a possible non-zero probability future where even Western democracies make tools like these illegal or require them to allow privileged access by authorities, which basically makes them useless, which is what is going on in repressive countries like China and Russia and Iran and North Korea. We always look at them and say, look how bad they are. And by the way, if we respond to the quote unquote good guy governments by allowing this, then all the bad guy governments will say, hey, we want that too. Yeah, we want that technology too. We need to be able to read everything. You can't just make a system like this that can only be used by the good guys. And once you start allowing for things like maybe on-device scanning for illegal or dangerous material, that is a very, very slippery slope. Like, who gets to define what's illegal or what's dangerous? And how might those definitions change over time depending on who happens to be voted into office? If we put in any sort of mechanism that allows for privileged access for law enforcement, that can and will be abused, either by law enforcement themselves, because law enforcement is made up of people, and people are flawed. People will do bad things. It's not like there's never been a politician or a police officer who has never broken the law or used these tools for their own benefit somehow. But also, because they're in there, that means the bad guys will find some way to exploit them too. And I don't just mean, other governments. I'm talking about, malicious hackers. Look at what happened with Salt Typhoon. We had this system in place in our telecommunications services that allowed for lawful intercept. It's the wiretapping capability. And guess what? Some hackers in China used that very self-same technology that we put in there just for the good guys to tap all of our phones and text messages. That was Salt Typhoon. And finally, this will not stop the criminals. The reason that they want us to do these things is so they can catch the bad guys. The bad guys will figure out ways to do this anyway. To paraphrase an old setting, if you outlaw encryption, then only outlaws will have encryption. This is only going to hurt those of us who are not criminals. It will not do what they want it to do. It will not solve the problem. It will just make things so much worse. Okay, so I will stop there and get off my soapbox on that. Sorry, I got a little worked up. By the way, a kind of a story came in late this week talking about an update to Google Android, where they basically looks like they're putting scanning technology on the Android phone, looking for nudity and things like that. It's supposedly all local. It sounds like something Apple has been doing. I will have to get to that in the next news show. But for now, let's do a really quick pseudo tip of the week. It's not your normal tip of the week, and because we're running along today, I'm going to keep this very short and really just point you to the article on my blog. It should be the top one there. And it's about privacy-enhancing technologies. And really what I want to say is that over time, and we'll sprinkle these out probably, it took me months to get through these. There's a lot of them. But I want to introduce some of these PETs, these privacy-enhancing technologies that are really pretty cool. And they're kind of up and coming. Some of these you might not be able to use directly. A lot of my tips of the week, I usually try to make them something directly actionable. But I realize there's some things that really don't fit that mold that I do want to talk about. And so I probably will be doing some articles like this where I just want to explain, an explainer instead of a tip maybe, how some of these things work and why they're important. So that when you do hear about these things, when you see products and services that tout some of these technologies, you'll have a better understanding of what they really mean. So this will include things like differential privacy, zero-knowledge proofs, homomorphic encryption, and onion routing and things like that. These sound really esoteric, but they're really cool. And we've gotten to the point now where we don't want to trust anyone with our data. So we need to come up with some of these really interesting techniques to transfer and process data in ways that don't require us to trust a third party. So anyway, go to my website. You can check out the full article, firewallsdon'tstopdragons.com. And over the coming weeks, I'll be bringing some of these to you right here in the tip of the week slot. So there you go. There is your news and your tip of the week. All right, that's going to do it for this week. We're running a little bit long, so I'll keep this short. We've got a lot of great shows coming up. Next week, we're going to have the interview with Yael Grauer. She was so much fun to talk to, and I'm so glad I got a chance to meet her at ShmooCon. She's a lot of fun to talk to. And then I've got, I think, 5 interviews scheduled to be recorded in the next 3 weeks. So lots of stuff coming up. I'm going to be talking soon with Weld Pond. That's his hacker name from the Loft. His real name is Chris Weisopel. He's going to have some fun stories for us. We're going to be talking to Josh from All Things Secured. If you haven't checked out his website, he's got some great content. And I've followed him for a long time on social media, and I'm really looking forward to talking with him. I've got a couple interviews around ed tech, educational technology, which is really a pejorative term as far as I'm concerned, because a lot of it has been really harsh for the privacy of our students and also horrible with security. So I'm going to be talking with a really cool small company that's doing some great work identifying the security and privacy problems with a lot of modern applications, and then talking with a lawyer about some of the class action lawsuits filed against some of these ed tech companies for doing horrible things with our kids' privacy. And I finally made a connection with the founders of ShmooCon. We were having some really weird email problems that we still haven't quite gotten to the bottom yet, but we finally established communications, and they are definitely down to do an interview. So at some point, I'm going to be getting a really fun historical look back at ShmooCon and hacker conferences and hacker culture. And so much more. I've got like a dozen interviews in the works. So lots of great content. Subscribe, and then you won't miss any of that goodness. That'll do it for this week, everybody. Take care out there. Stay safe. And until next week, as always, don't get caught with your drawbridge down.